Hey guys, all right, this is going to be the longer version of my video on MAF. I'm going to give you my thoughts, first of all, on aerobic training, but concerning testing and specifically the MAF test. So I'm up here, just finished one of my long runs, and I'll use this as kind of an example. For whatever reason, I always feel better moving while explaining this kind of stuff, especially because I can start the run and embed kind of my first thoughts. And as I run, I work through, the things that I think would be useful and hopefully remember to kind of, bring it or present it in a way that would be most useful for people. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. On MAF testing, what it is max aerobic function or formula, however you kind of want to look at that. It was designed by Phil Maffetone, who's a great coach, world champion triathletes. He's very famous for kind of fixing some problems that we're actually going to talk about, which is why I really do like his method. Now, is it the most accurate test out there to establish zone 2? Absolutely not. There are many other methods, and in the comments, that's really what you see is, we do have quite a few endurance junkies and friends and competitive athletes that we've trained over the years. Being one myself, formerly, I understand that you deal in a world that's very specific, and therefore you might look at the MAF test and be like, oh God, that thing is just a formula. It's not accurate. There's outliers, and we'll talk about some of those outliers. But I agree with you 100%. And I do want to cover the things that I do think are better tests just so people know about them. Now, the reasons why I would do more accurate testing need to be considered. The reason why I land on the MAF test is because the application that I'm most concerned with is of general physical preparedness. And some people are probably like, hybrid athletes or whatever the fuck you want to call yourselves these days. But it's the same principle. General physical preparedness is the balancing of as many energy systems that you need in order to have, good general physical fitness. And that's generally where I go with thinking about what I would use aerobic training for. And that's why the MAF test works, because it's accurate enough. Now, some of the other methods, there's the shitty ones like the 220 minus your age and taking a percentage of that generally ends you up on a low zone 2, like very low. Some people might even consider bordering zone 1. And it is garbage. Like 220 these are two general numbers taken for a formula. It doesn't work very well. For instance, the example that we used to use all the time was like Lance Armstrong and Jared from Subway, that pedo. They're the same age, and therefore, would I train them at the same rate using the 220 minus your age formula? Absolutely not. They're totally different people. Now, the MAF formula is a formula, but it does take into consideration your individual needs. So the 180 minus your age, and then there's a construct to make adjustments from there. And they're pretty smart, whether you've been sick, whether you have a long training history. So right now I sit about 5 points above my MAF score. The examples I used in the Instagram video are actual my numbers when I retested them. So my mile coming back from not having a base was a 908 MAF mile, and I sit around a 142 for a MAF pace or MAF heart rate. So there's the formulas. There's other ones too. Steve House and some of the people from Uphill Athlete established a low-high AET, AT, and not to get within that, but it's like a aerobic functional or aerobic efficiency threshold. We're kind of talking about the same thing, using a little bit more complicated language. It's, I would say, more appropriate for people that are more general endurance athletes, like uphill athletes, or however you want to describe yourself. It is a good method. I 100%, if you're interested in something like that, I can leave a link in the notes below so that you can actually go learn about their system. My favorite when I was actually competing in endurance sports was just to do a lactic threshold test and take a percentage of that. The reason being is that it is the most accurate way to assess how you're processing lactate, which is kind of actually what we're really describing. The reason why that's important is because once I push over 4 millimole of blood lactate levels, I can't clear that out of my blood and deliver nutrients to support effort. And so that's what leads to what we would call a bonk, where I run out of glycogen. So that's why I think, a ramp test, lactic threshold test is super smart, really important to do if you're a competitive endurance athlete. The other thing to say about this is, like, if you're a competitive endurance athlete, you're not going to be fucking listening to me. You're probably already doing endurance sports, and you probably already know. So that's also why I led to this information is for people who are, generally speaking, trying to get a good, well-rounded, energetic system going for general fitness. That includes, people who have, even if you're a fit person in strength domains, power domains, CrossFit, this is what it's for. Testing and understanding your aerobic base and how you've eroded it through too much high intensity training, or that you've never developed it in the first place. This can be very, very beneficial, and it doesn't have to be complex. That's kind of the entire point. These people arguing about what method works and what method doesn't. In fact, I would say this, I'm talking about a MAF test being useful only so you can track your progress and you can arrive to a level that I think is the most, generic, metric for general fitness of aerobic ability. But if you just go run 3 times a week for somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes, you'll probably be just fine. Like there's it's not that complicated. And that's what I want to bring to people's attentions, honestly, is that don't overcomplicate the stuff. The reason why I want to use the MAF method for people or teach them about it is because it's looking a level deeper than just saying, like, oh, I jog, because there are downsides to just going out and doing random acts of fitness. And some of that has to do with uncontrolled pacing. So a lot of people go to run and they run it as fast as they can because they're, this is like kind of the reasons. First of all, I have to premise this. I don't want to make this about just criticizing other people because there's a lot of nuance in that, but there's plenty of bad examples of this, and I do want to mention them. When CrossFit Endurance came out, Brian McKenzie leading kind of the charge on that, it became about trying to high intensity your way to ultra events that led to who knows how many DNFs from people that actually attempted that. Now, it fell off pretty quickly because we realized that maximal aerobic training is not the same thing as steady pace training. And that's what Lydiard was talking about for years. Then CrossFit Endurance was kind of born with Chris Henshaw at the lead. And I had a lot of hope for that, honestly, because, he had a background in endurance and he seemed to really understand steady state training. And before long, his thing became about appealing to CrossFitters and selling them a thing rather than developing them. And there is a huge difference. So instead of teaching people to do long, slow, steady states to really round out their aerobic system, he ended up in the same trap as anybody else does, which is like, well, I'm fucking bored, so I'm going to do, 4-minute intervals and rest, and it'll be an average heart rate. And it just became about easy, medium, and hard training just to sell a system. So that's disappointing as well. This might be the reason why I guess a lot of people are frustrated, because the bigger names out there talking about endurance do not really cover it in a way that gives you any realistic application to it. It's either go hard, and again, nothing against the guy himself, but David Goggins isn't teaching principles that lead to meaningful amounts of developed aerobic fitness that you can apply in your life. It's inspirational to people, but this is actually where I think the misconception comes from with David Goggins. He's in a peak motivated state, and a lot of people think that that's how you get through endurance, and it's actually the opposite. Endurance is about being in the lowest motivated state where you're about to quit and want to give up and don't want to finish what you set out to do. And it's really about developing the attributes that apply that discipline of not quitting, not just slapping yourself in the face and telling yourself how hard you are. That's where we really disagree, or I disagree personally with how he approaches it. That being said, if that works for you, fucking have at it. It doesn't matter. Whatever gets you out and doing the thing is the most important part to this. So if me talking about doing this test, it interests you and causes a bunch of curiosity, and you go out there and you test and you figure out like, oh, my aerobic system isn't that well developed, maybe I should work on that. That is exactly what I want out of this. That's the only goal with this in mind. That's why I'm giving away all of this shit for free, because I figured the more people that have better general capacity, the better we are. So onto the MAF test. What you'll do is you'll use that formula 180 minus your age, plus or minus based off of your history of illness and your history of development in sports or whatever. Injury counts for it too as well. And get that number. Now, how I want to perform it for myself personally is at a track. I prefer a track because I just move better outside, feels better, but you do want to control the conditions. So if a treadmill is the best way for you to do that, do it on a treadmill. Now, this is where a lot of the application or the practical application of the test come in. A lot of people will do this test. I mean, more than you think will come back to me. This happened actually with somebody I was coaching years ago that was a Hopeful Games athlete, absolute monster, lifting, slinging weights, and we pinpointed very quickly that he had a deficient aerobic system. So this is one of the first things that I did with him. Hey, go run this test for me. And he came back and he was like, I think I did it wrong, because I had to walk. And I was like, yeah, except that some people are so inefficient at running or the movement that they're trying to develop that they do in fact have to walk. But that's a sign that that's how deficient it is. So I was like, what did you do? He's like, I stopped. I was like, okay, not only is the test showing that you're deficient, we're seeing the mental deficiency in your ability to tolerate endurance as well, because that's generally what happens is with a lack of aerobic endurance, somebody's mind actually doesn't respond very well either. So I had him go back, do the test. He basically had to, jog or walk or, slow it down just in order to keep that steady heart rate for what ended up being about 12 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, a 12:40 mile is not impressive, and that's where most people get defeated. But what it shows is an absolute potential for development. And that's all it is. It's just a number to show us where you need to work. And so all we do is apply that pace. Now, once I get that pace, now what we're looking for is to do steady state training in controllable terrain. So I'm here I'm in the hills by my house, and the run I just did has 2,200 feet of gain or something like that. This is not the course to develop true kind of aerobic efficiency. You can, I can adjust my pace in order to keep that steady state, in which I do. But if you're just starting out, this would be much too complex. You would probably end up overshooting it. And so use flat terrain until you can get some kind of developed cardiovascular response. So what I usually say is we're looking for this inflection point of cardiac drift. Cardiac drift describes the point where my MAF heart rate is starting to creep up, and I'm trying to hold the same pace. So let's say that my mile was a 12:40 something, and I've been running for 35 minutes, and my 140 heart rate is now starting to creep up to 145, 146. I've just reached a point of inflection where my body is starting to process more acidity, and it's starting to not be able to clear the byproduct and the waste product from this metabolic pathway. In which case, I'm going to start switching over into threshold and tempo, and that is a different kind of development. That causes a different kind of fatigue. So at that point, that's when you pull the plug. That's when I cease, or I push maybe another couple minutes into it. That's fine. But I end my training session because I've developed the aerobic system in the efficiency that I want it pretty, in the 35 or 40 minutes that it took. Now, the next session, my intention will be to hit that marker or push it a little bit further. And what you notice is not necessarily a shift in the time domain, although we are pushing to be able to hold this longer and longer. What you actually first notice is a change in the pace. So what I'll notice is that I can hold a higher pace at a given heart rate, generally speaking, before the time domain extends. And this is where we see two kind of shifts that I think are common, which is the first adjustment. The first person who is very aerobically deficient will become pace deficient. They'll be able to steady out just a jog, a slow run, something around the lines of like 11-minute or 10.5-minute mile. And at that point, that's when we start working on duration. So this is kind of the back and forth between developing max aerobic function, is because there is so much benefit in the crossover. Now, we talked a little bit about average heart rate and kind of the corollaries that come with it, but a lot of the stuff that happens is personality based. And this is what a lot of people don't know how to talk about it. Maybe they just realize it and keep it to themselves. But developing aerobic fitness, especially the base foundation for zone 2, is a good way to channel discipline. Discipline is kind of the act of doing what you intended to do despite your feelings not to want to do it. And I think this is really important. It's an important attribute. Now, if you don't believe me, you think this is like a long draw or whatever, just look at how every major military in the world uses repetitive running in order to instill behavior, which is discipline. Now, it doesn't mean there's not a side effect or a negative side effect to developing too much discipline, which eventually you start to erode or overwrite your ability to self-care, which is the other balancing act of endurance. So on the next part, I will go into self-care, but just know that it's the balancing portion of endurance training that helps counteract the negative consequences of too much discipline. Too much discipline can be described as, I'm going to do something despite the fact it's going to hurt me. And this is really where you run into, people. I would say even Goggins might be a part of this, where he's teaching kind of this mentality, which is we are using aerobic fitness to develop ourselves, to develop our system. We're using it to improve our aerobic function. We are not using it to prove our worth. And there is a huge difference in that. If I'm using exercise to prove my worth, I'm going to be very, very disappointed with the outcome, because the second something bad happens, like an injury or, something catastrophic, your worth will tank because you've connected it to your identity or your athleticism or whatever the ability is. And this is what we see in athletes that just have these implosions after their athletic career, because they've really built it off of their self-worth. And I just want to put that in there, because we do know how to stay clear of that. It does take some learning, and it does take making some mistakes with it, because it does feel good. You do feel value in your ability to discipline yourself and really like teach yourself to do hard things. There's value in that concept, but there is not self-worth to be found in the speed at which you can finish a run. That is irrelevant. Now, you can be proud of yourself for the attributes that made that happen, but the actual act itself is just a correlation. And this is what we really want to dive into later. So if this helped broaden out any of the misconceptions you've had about aerobic fitness, I hope it did. I hope there's like something here that you can actually tangibly pull. If you want more information on kind of how to do this specifically, or you think that I missed something, feel free to drop something in the comments to let me know, and I'll try to cover it when I come back for our second part on aerobic development. Again, all of this stuff is just to help people develop the parts of themselves that give them kind of greater advantage. These fitness attributes are levers. They're giant levers. Your ability to move nonstop at a good clip for an hour is such an absolute correlation to what you can get out of life other than just fitness. And that's really what I want people to start potentially understanding. And that's the reason that I might take time to do these sorts of episodes. So thanks guys for tuning in. If you made it this far, if I didn't ramble too much, hopefully look out for that episode 2. I'll let you know first on Instagram, and then we'll probably do a longer thing here as well. Take care, guys.